Welcome back to the Gentleman's Gazette. In today's video we discuss how to argue like a gentleman. How a person argues strikes right at the heart of a person's personality. And if you're threatened or you're in a defensive position, you may behave differently, but that truly reflects your character. If you want to learn about how we define what a gentleman is today, please check out this video here, and then we can continue on focusing just on the argument and what you should and should not do. First off, I went to law school, and like many lawyers, I like being right. Now, I think a lot of people like to be right, but that doesn't mean that you always have to be about winning an argument. It's about learning and growth. And personally, I've learned a lot more from my mistakes than from the things that I did that were right or where I won. If we go back in time, in 1727, Benjamin Franklin created the Leather Apron Club, which was a club where men would have arguments. In order to be admitted, you had to meet 4 criteria, or basically answer 4 questions. 1. Do you have disrespect for any of the current members? The right answer would have been no. 2. Do you love mankind, regardless of religion or profession? The right answer would have been yes. And this club consisted of a wide range of different people of different socioeconomic statuses and education levels. Of course, they were all white men, but that's a different topic of discussion. 3. Do you feel people should ever be punished for their opinions or modes of worship? The right answer would have been no. For some people, that may seem obvious, but looking at those, it emphasizes that truth stands above all, which is based on fact, and it means even if you're wrong and you feel like you're losing, it's still the truth that should come out on top. Now, these 4 questions show that you have mutual respect, that you're open-minded, that you're tolerant, and that you're welcoming to other people's beliefs and are open to them. So why is it so hard to have a productive argument? And I think there are a number of reasons that go right to the core of how we feel, and it's important to think about them rationally so we can overcome an inner feeling that may be unfair and unjust towards the person we're talking to. The first barrier for productive argument is opinion protectionism. What I mean by that is that we all feel that we're entitled to our opinion and that we don't have to back it up with facts so other people can understand why we have this opinion. So, for example, legally, I'm entitled to believe that 1 + 1 is 3. However, based on the rules of math that everyone knows, people will not respect me if I simply say 1 + 1 is 3 and I'm not going to change your mind and you can't tell me anything else. In my experience, if you believe that what you know is right and you're not open to change, this is the biggest barrier to having a productive argument. It's called dropping an anchor, and it stops conversation right there, and chances are it will end badly in name calling or other things, and people will be upset and they will even remember it and look at you as someone who is not a person of reason, fact, or fairness. The second issue is that opinions and beliefs can be quite personal and fundamental. Just think about politics, topics like abortion, and in the US specifically, it's very uncommon for people to have conversations about those topics because there's this kind of fear of having different opinions, and people much rather switch to small talk. However, as a gentleman, you should be able to present your point, talk about the pros and the cons, listen to the other person, admit to their valid points, and explain why you still think the way you do, without disrespecting the other person or giving them the feeling that their point of view is inferior to yours. The third barrier to a good argument is the belief that competition and winning or losing are more important than personal growth. Of course, we all like to win, and it's a good feeling to be looked at by others and recognized as the winner. At the same time, if you just go into an argument wanting to win and wanting to be right and wanting to have the last word, you may not learn from the other person. You may not learn that you may be wrong. You may disregard something that may actually help you and get you further down along the way. So, in my opinion, that winning can be losing for yourself because you're not getting ahead in life and you're just stuck in your belief system. If you can't back up your opinion by proper facts that others reasonably understand, you may feel like the winner, but other people will not look at you that way because they just think of you as a narcissistic dick. The fourth barrier of having a productive argument is the fear of being wrong. And as I mentioned, I like to be right. I think of myself as thoughtful and thinking things through. So when I come up with a solution or an opinion, I truly believe that I've done my homework. At the same time, if I let my ego get in the way of accepting that maybe I have not done my proper homework and I have overlooked things or not considered certain points, and based on that, my opinion or whatever I say is maybe not quite right or maybe even terribly wrong, I have to be willing to admit that and admit fault. When you do that, you show vulnerability, and some people may consider that to be a weakness. However, I personally believe that showing others that you can change your mind and that you can be wrong and that you look at truth for its own sake rather than your personal interest makes them respect you a lot more, especially in the long run. I fully understand that traditional masculine morals demand that a man shows no weakness, and weakness can be crying or admitting fault. But if you look at the great leaders in the world or successful businessmen, they admit mistakes and they move on. They take the ego out of things and rather look at what's beneficial to them. And growing is always more beneficial to you than being right for its own sake. Now, the gentleman's philosophy of an argument should be that discussions should always be encouraged, because if you talk to other people, chances are you can always learn something from others, and that's a good thing, because you always want to improve yourself and be a better person. Also, opinions are not sacred. You have to be willing to sacrifice an opinion that you hold dear to your heart and maybe adjust it or transform it completely. I know it's hard, but winning should never be the goal. It goes against what you've learned in kindergarten and all along the way, where if you engage in something, you want to win. And competitiveness is good to a certain degree, but you should not try to just win and shout the other down, but be open and productive. And at the end of the day, that will win you more respect and will make you more successful in the long run. Now, that all sounds nice in theory, and it can be really tough if you have an opponent who doesn't respect those rules. Just the other day, for example, I was driving to a parking lot, there was a turn lane and a straight lane, and the arrows on the road had kind of faded. So I was in a turn lane, but I realized I wanted to go right, so I set my blinker, I drove over, and I went to my parking spot. When I got out of the car, a guy pretty much next door came out and said, "You're a really shitty driver." So I said, "I'm sorry if I cut you off, I didn't mean to do that." So he would go on and say, "You're a really shitty driver, you're a really shitty driver." So I could see he was upset, so I looked at his car, and he had actually parked in a rental car spot. He had blocked 2 spots entirely, and I said, "Well, you should look at your parking first." And when he felt attacked, he started calling me names. He said, "You're a brick, you're an asshole," and he was very aggressive. So I didn't respond to that. It was hard for me because, when somebody calls you that, you want to be mean or sarcastic and say things along the lines of, well, if I would get advice, not from someone who can park like that, but I was able to control myself and not do that and basically walk away. And when I came back to my car, I saw him and I wished him a good day. And he was still calling me names, but I just, got into my car and drove away. If you encounter those situations, sometimes it's best not to engage, because those kind of people They drag you down to their level and then they beat you with their experience, because that's what they do all day long. So the essence of this story is, if you want to be a gentleman, you have to stick to the rules even if the other person doesn't. Another important point is that your body language is equally important as your tone of voice and what you say. For example, my wife always says, "You have the idiot face on," and when I do that, which is somewhat subconscious, she automatically feels defensive no matter what I say. So trying to understand what you do and how your voice changes and how your facial expressions change when you're upset or in disagreement, and being able to control that can really help in a situation of an argument. Now, how do you argue with a spouse? When you have a partner in life, there will always be arguments, because at the end of the day, you're different people, you have different points of views, and not having any arguments is a sign of an unhealthy relationship. So don't be afraid of having arguments from time to time. However, in those situations, it's even more important to stick to the gentlemanly rules. Otherwise, your relationship may suffer and it may even lead to a divorce down the line. So in those situations, the need to constantly win can really have a long-term damaging effect. So keep in mind that it's not always you who has to be right, but that you have to be open that the other person is right as well, and that you give it to them and that you admit that. Don't just brush concerns of your significant other aside or disengage and walk away or maybe pout. It's important to keep a dialogue going and to be honest and open until you resolve the issue and you both forgive each other or admit the other person's position or continue in a meaningful way. That can be very emotional, but it's important to try to show that you work on something together rather than just you go to your corner and hoping that the other person comes after you. Don't bring up threats like "I'm going to divorce you" or "I'm going to leave you" or anything of that kind in an argument, because that is designed to shut down the conversation right then and there, which actually doesn't solve the issue. It just stops the discussion and the resolution. Very important. Don't bring up past transgressions or past fights that were already resolved. If they're truly not resolved, maybe you have to sit down and discuss why it keeps coming up over and over again, and there may be an underlying issue, but it can be unfair to go back in old patterns and say things like, "You're always like that. Remember, you're doing it again." Unless, of course, it's justified, but doing it in a such aggressive, accusatory manner will not help you in the argument. Don't exaggerate actions of your spouse or the partner in your argument, because that will just enrage them more and it will be more emotionally charged. It will give them a reason to point out that you are wrong in that regard, and if you're wrong in that regard, you may also be wrong in anything else that you say. So try to stick to the facts and don't overinflate your numbers or whatever it is that you're talking about. Also, don't offer a fake apology or be sarcastic, because that will immediately shut down the conversation. A good thing to keep in mind is, rather than criticizing the person, criticize the action. It takes out that personal element, and chances are that your significant other will feel less attacked by it and therefore be able to continue to keep the conversation going. In conclusion, to argue like a gentleman is one of the most difficult things to do, because it means that you have to be vulnerable. You have to accept that you can be wrong. You have to admit that your opinions are maybe not always right. You have to listen to others, and you have to keep the conversation going. This is particularly difficult in a society where winning or weakness as a man is considered as bad. But in the long term, if you do those things, if you are tolerant, open-minded, and respectful of others, you will get respect back. It will help you in your career path, because people will look at you as someone that has honest rules and judges himself and others by the same standards. So you're not a hypocrite, but a good person. And it will also help you to grow and to become better. And at the end of the day, win in that regard, which is much more important than winning a simple argument just by being louder or more right than the other person. If you enjoyed this video, please sign up for a newsletter. Make sure you check out the video on what it means to be a gentleman today here. And For more videos, stay tuned.